Welcome to American Girls, the podcast. This is the podcast where we will be reliving the American Girls series book by book, except on this Patreon where we're going to be discussing things that we imagine to be part of the world of this show. I'm Mary.
I'm still Allison.
Welcome, everyone. We've gathered today to talk about a very beautiful, special book called Death at Hull House, an Emily Cabot Mystery by none other than Frances McNamara.
Now, Mary, we are recording on Women's Equality Day. Aren't you excited that everyone's equal now?
Mostly I'm just thinking about the chocolate cake that I regret not having today, but yes, like what a fait accompli. Like, why do we even need this holiday? It's a foregone conclusion that we're all equal, right?
Absolutely. So the 19th Amendment, it solved everything. Thank you, everyone. This has been a really wonderful, wonderful Patreon episode. No, we are thrilled to be diving into this book. Even if you didn't read it, that's okay. It deals with close to the turn of the century world of none other than Jane Addams, who frankly, I'll never stop talking about.
She's like your number one. Like, she's up there for you.
She's my number one. And I'll tell you a genuine high that I think about weekly. You and I were doing research at Swarthmore, and I was looking at the collection of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, of which Jane was a very formative member and very important pacifist within. And I said to the archivist, someone needs to write the big book on Jane Addams, because all we really have still are like bits and pieces of her story. And this woman looked me dead in the eyes and said, maybe it's you. And honestly, like, I've never gotten off that high.
Honestly, first of all, shout out to all the archivists out there, inspiring dreams, making like historians like us dream bigger dreams maybe than we've dreamed for ourselves. Like, would you have said before that maybe it's you who writes the bio on Jane Addams?
No, I mean, I would say I wrote a mediocre to good seminar paper on Jane Addams that I thought was, decent.
I'm sure it was great.
This book is about a murder, and it is not about a murder. And I'll just say, you don't need to be into true crime, and probably better, frankly, if you don't like true crime, if you are thinking of a book to read. Emily Cabot, I would say, is not a great detective. I would say the murder barely matters. The person who is eliminated from the narrative, not really super important overall. This book has two major red herrings. Do you know what they are?
Is one of them Florence Kelly?
So one of them is like the general representation of heterosexuality in this book.
Yeah, okay.
I would say that's red herring number one. And red herring number two is we are given like a very literal boom bang murder of a tangential character in this book. God, I'm like really enjoying this. I'm like very excited about this is like my thing. But the actual deaths that matter for advancing the plot relate to an epidemic. And I was just trying to live my life reading this book on my day off in my beach chair, not at a beach. And I'm thinking to myself, will we ever escape this pandemic? No.
Not in this book, not in our day-to-day lives, never. Definitely not.
Did Frances need to go this hard for Jane? No, but she did.
She did. And also, like, a smallpox epidemic is intense. Like, as far as epidemics go, she picked something that's like, she wasn't afraid.
I want to talk a bit about Frances, and I just want to say, like, smallpox, big problems, right? We know that.
That's right. Yeah.
Frances grew up in Massachusetts. Love. Her father was a police commissioner. ? She has degrees from Mount Holyoke and Simmons colleges, and she worked as a librarian at the University of Chicago. So Frances, in terms of like, she's like deep in the women's colleges. I'm not saying she inspired Samantha.
I'm not saying she didn't.
I'm not saying she didn't. When she's not working or writing, she can be found on the Charles River or beaching on Cape Cod. I love her.
I wanna be friends with her. Like I said to you off air, like, this is our retirement plan.
Yeah.
Like, writing historical mysteries involving famous people in the past, that is my retirement plan for us. I've not consulted you about this, but I feel like you're
No.
okay with it.
She has a brand. She's like, "Did you like Death at Hull House?" Pause. "I will give you Death at Pullman." "Did you like that?" Pause. "I will give you Death at the Chicago World's Fair." And she's like, "Need I go on?"
Yes, please. She's like, "I'm not gonna ask if you want more, here it is." This is like a very niche form of mystery novel that I really love. Like I went to a house tour in Newport, and in the gift shop I discovered that there is a new mystery series, or new to me, of set in all the Newport mansions, where it's like, again, same Emily Cabot sort of setup, like one person who's tangentially related, or like in the worldview of Alva Vanderbilt and seemingly everyone who owned a mansion on Bellevue Ave. And it's like, I don't need a reason, just do it. Thank you.
No, and I don't think we're ever led to believe that Emily is exceptionally adept at solving crime. Crimes do seem to happen around her a lot, a la your favorite Angela Lansbury character.
I mean, Jessica B, we're gonna bring Jessica Beatrice Fletcher into this.
I mean, Emily Cabot, she's got a lineage. Her father's a judge. Like, Frances, we get it. You and Emily are the same person. We get it.
Yes, and what's interesting to me that I think is the tell that Frances is Emily is that Emily actually doesn't really play a foundational role in solving this crime. Like,
No.
it's a detective novel in which the detective character, or like the unofficial detective that we're meant to identify with and follow, is herself really there for the hang and not really
Yeah.
there to solve the crime. So
Yeah.
it's kind of like a tell to me that Frances is like, this is my time machine, and I really just want to like move through these spaces and bring you with me in
Yeah.
the form of Emily Cabot. And it's like, guess what? I'm here for that. I forgot about the crime multiple times in
Me
this book.
too.
Didn't
So
you?
I did. And so this book is described online as the well plotted sequel to Death at the Fair, which I'm just going to agree with.
And also, Allison, I will say I'm not putting this on you, but I am kind of putting this on you. I didn't realize this was a book two of a series. And there
Yeah.
were different times in this book where she was like, well, as we remember, like, detective, like, am I correct in saying that his last name is Whitebread?
Yes. Or
Detective
Whitbread.
Whitbread, Whitebread, it feels of
Same
a
difference.
piece, whatever. She was like, "Yeah, remember like last year when this happened?" And I was genuinely like, "Wait a second. Was I told this and I just spaced?" And I do think there were events in book 1 that were
Yes.
sort of relevant to book 2.
Here's how this book entered our lives, and it couldn't have entered at a better time. I have a fantastic colleague named Rezi, and they are a graduate of Mount Holyoke. They
Excellent.
came across this book and were like, huh, this seems, you know, and knowing that it was written by a fellow alum, read it. They handed it to me one day and said, "This is the kind of thing you like. Just."
Excellent.
So I think what happened was Frances, I might call her Franny, stay tuned. She had a cork board and she said, "Here's the stuff I like. Chicago librarians." She's like,
Yep.
"That's me."
That's her.
That's Emily Cabot. Cabot is also a very prominent surname of people from the Boston area, like very wealthy old family. So she's also like carrying that cash. And she's like, "I want to write about Jane Addams. I want to write about Hull House. I want there to be a murder because, like, that's the thing that I do." And she was like, "I want there to be smallpox. I want there to be friction and like possibly sexual tension that goes nowhere with the doctor."
There
She
is
hits,
let me just say this, in a true like Emily also is a graduate of Wellesley,
is she?
right? Yeah,
She's
she's a
holy.
graduate of
She,
No,
oh,
she's
she is.
Wellesley.
She's okay. So she,
Which is interesting. I was like, Frankie, which is what I choose to call her when we're
she,
friends.
she flipped it. She flipped it.
When we meet her, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to say, Frankie, real pleasure, huge fan. Allison's losing it. Huge fan. Would love to take you out to a Dunkin' coffee on me, wherever you want to go. What's your stomping grounds? Let's do this thing. And then you can smooth in and be like, whatever you think what did you think her nickname was?
Like Francie or
Francie. I think like Frankie like feels like her energy, but
yeah,
again, I've not met her yet in the flesh. I've met her on the page, and but I do think that counts for something.
it
But
does.
there is sexual tension in this book. It's not with the stated romantic love interest. It is with Emily's friend,
Yeah.
who's a chemistry graduate student at the University of Chicago,
Yes.
who unconvincingly is married off to her brother at the end of the book, Emily's brother.
The opening scene of this book is our hero and quasi detective Emily Cabot being forced out of University of Chicago for bad behaviors. And the bad behavior is that she was caught on the Midway, which is a gambling site. And as you mentioned, this is part of a series. We did not have book 1. She and her brother are in Chicago in part to inexplicably to us, because we didn't read book 1, solve the murder of their father, which happened with like Scabs and others back in Boston. We are not going to get deep into the plot because I'm just not super interested in that.
It does not matter at all.
No, it doesn't matter, and it's not cuz it's a poorly written book. The thing that I loved about this is I was like sitting outside, like in my Massachusetts locale, and being in the world of Jane Addams is a dream of mine.
It's been a long time dream. Yes.
Just like a few fast Jane Addams facts. Born just prior to the Civil War, 1860 to 1935. What a lifespan. Her father's her hero. She meets other men that people consider heroes. They let her down. She does
He
her own
doesn't.
thing. No, he doesn't.
He never lets her down.
She does her own thing and starts Hull House, which is her biggest flex. My favorite thing about her, well, among many, when she writes her life story, she writes it as a history of Hull House, which is her settlement house, because to her, the project and herself, they're inexplicably intertwined. And it also allows her to write her life story without having to out herself. I think there's like other elements to that there. Jane
Definitely.
Addams is like a brilliant philosopher, brilliant person, super interesting. And there's also a tension of Jane Addams is trying to solve social problems in very real and tangible ways, and she's a living praxis. But this book also reminds you, as Jane was well aware, that there's elements of her, like there's a few scenes where it's like Jane brought out the good china for tea with like the kindergartners who are from all over the neighborhood. That's an exaggeration, but like Jane lives between the wealthy and the people who are struggling in the city. And like that's her goal in her life, but it's hard and it's awkward and it's messy, and people are constantly criticizing her.
Yeah, and I think the book does a good job of like having Emily kind of live out that tension in an even more exaggerated way because it involves a crime. Like
Yeah.
trying to navigate how do you solve a crime that involves like going out into the neighborhood and speaking to folks when like there's a lot of times in the book where Emily and her brother, who I hate as a character, like I think you're meant to like think he's a mess, and I
Yeah.
certainly did. But he goes out and like his character, especially less than Emily, make these decisions privileging finding who killed her dad over like totally blind to the ways that like calling the police on an immigrant living in a tenement would expose them and their families to all kinds of surveillance and retribution, like within the bureaucracy of the government that would not touch them but clearly touches the immigrants. And it's
Right.
like that kind of messiness of like, oh, that never occurred to me that you would be arrested or your children would be taken from you or you would have to go off grid because of all these like issues of legality. Like you can see very clearly how like people who are incredibly privileged are, you know, that kind of blindness shows up in these like real world interactions.
She also is kind of forced to go to Hull House because she is kicked out of University of Chicago, for this like supposedly like impolite or improper behavior. And one of the things she kind of struggles with is whether she'd rather be working in the laboratory or if she wants to be among people like Jane. And she finds Jane Addams up close to be a little bit more wooden and uninteresting than she
Mm,
kind of imagined. And I also think, you think of very charismatic leaders in history, you don't want to live with those people. Like, you actually
absolutely
want to
not.
live with a Jane who's like, maybe not the funniest, maybe not the most striking beauty of all time, but she paid the electric bill and she knows your favorite snack. I
I think you're mapping yourself onto Jane right now, and I just need to just like pump your
don't care.
brakes.
I don't care. I love this. This book just touched on so many things I find personally interesting. Like Florence Kelly comes in like the wrecking ball that she was, and Florence Kelly has this kind of interesting role where, similar to Emily, similar to Jane, there is this gap between the law and the way that it's actually being carried out. And Florence is constantly busting into sweatshops and factories and trying to enforce labor law. So everyone hates her because the people who are trying to work can't stand her because she's interrupting their flow. And I think a lot of us have had moments when it's like, but you're wrong. It's like, okay, but no one wants to hear it right now. Like Florence is that in a shell.
Yes, like, you can kind of see how, like, the righteousness that's driving everything that she's doing, where even when it's dislocated from, like, a real world practical application, like, the scene that we get in the beginning of the book or towards the beginning is that Emily's at Hull House. She's led this very academic life. She thinks about ideas in the abstract, social problems, like, she's never had to think about solving them with practical solutions. So she ends up with Florence Kelly out trying to enforce the 8-hour workday.
Yeah.
And what's interesting about these scenes is that Florence, like the narrator keeps telling you that there's been a regulation for the 8-hour workday for women that's been passed. And Florence has basically appointed herself the person who goes around to factories and is like, you're not enforcing this. You have to, these women need to go home. They've been here since 7 a.m., whatever. And even when she knows it's not like enforceable, she's still out there like at a full 11 doing this work. And I think that really shows you in an anecdote like how deeply she cares about this work and how much it's ingrained really into her total identity.
I relate to it so hard. I do. I just cuz I know when
Yeah.
I get convinced that something is unfair, I just
Yes.
I relate to that, and I'm not as useful as Florence Kelly is to society, but I get it. I understand that impulse, and I also understand from the historical distance, a lot of the scenes I think are very well written where Florence Kelly and others are interacting for people where she thinks she understands what the best interest of everyone is, but there are short-term problems that are going to be exacerbated by her intervening.
Yes.
And I think kind of the redemption of Florence being frankly kind of annoying for a lot of the book is she sneaks off quite a bit, and it makes Emily Cabot, detective, suspicious. Like, where is she going? And you learn that Florence Kelly is actually going off to assist women who are both not able to leave abusive partners and also not able to like cope with the trauma that given day. And they get together and they have this kind of safe space where they can hide out that's outside of the system. And to me, that's kind of Florence's redemption, where the whole time you think she's so letter of the law. And then there's kind of these like gatherings that are happening very under the radar.
Yeah, and I think that's really interesting too, which is like so much of the work that Jane and Florence are doing is public. Like they're
Yeah.
very publicly doing this work. Like they're out there. Jane is doing like the sanitation round. Like they're doing all this work like out in the neighborhoods. They're identified with it. It is their identity. And so I think that was a really powerful reveal on Florence's part to the complexity of what's needed to meet the needs of the people in the neighborhood, which is that sometimes and just by the nature of the need, like it has to be private, it has to be secret, and you have to kind of disaggregate the part of yourself that maybe wants to be publicly seen doing this work from like the needs of the people that you're
Mhm.
serving who really need it to be private. So I actually thought that was really fascinating, and also kind of like navigating the cultural difference of Emily being like a wasp and
Yeah.
this taking place in the basement of a Catholic church, with a kind of like interesting alternative or like within Catholicism practice of venerating this saint who's associated with or they associate with domestic violence.
Mm.
So in Emily having to navigate, like I thought it was really weird that like Emily was brought into that meeting.
Well, I mean, she kind of inserted herself in the situation, I think.
Well, because she was following Florence in the street.
Yeah, yeah.
But it seemed like Florence lost her and then she kind of like snuck up behind her and like covered her mouth and like dragged her into the basement of the church.
I mean, I would say this, like, no one is terribly good at committing crime or like being subtle in this book, which is
There is
fine.
no subtlety at
there's
all.
there's not a lot of subtlety, and there's like periods where Emily seems to be pining for someone and then she's over it so fast. And then the ending of this book is basically the opposite of the ending of the cinematic masterpiece of 1994 Little Women, which is, this man named Barely is sort of like, "Are you into me?" And she's like, "Not
She's like,
so much
ah.
anymore."
It's so strange because I said to you off air, like the plot point in terms of the romantic art of the book is very much Jane Eyre. Like
Mm.
Emily is, in Chicago. Her father's been murdered. Her mother's back in Boston. Her brother is like at odds with her because she doesn't understand that he's abandoned his job to find their father's murderer. She's at Hull House. She's working through being expelled. This doctor who is also expelled, who's also at Hull House, like she's seemingly pining for him, but like I don't think there's been any establishment of like why we would pine for him, which is very
No.
Mr. Rochester, like who would want to be with this person? That's a more extreme case than Jane Eyre. But then there's this guy who emerges who keeps calling everyone comrade, and you can imagine him like living in Brooklyn. And he's
Yeah.
like, I'm a socialist, like I'm so woke, like he's quoting Marx casually to you at the dinner table. And Florence Kelly's like, girl, please, like, you're not the real thing I am. And then come to find out, this man comes from a wealthy family. And so he's sort of like vacationing in a place where everyone else literally lives with the knowledge that when his father passes, he'll inherit a huge fortune. And he's already like donating quite a bit to Whole House. So she can kind of like be with this man in the same way in Jane Eyre, like she could have married the missionary and had security and protection, even though she didn't love him and he didn't really love her, but she holds out for this like kind of eccentric sort of person who seems unavailable. And then it at the end, like they get together and I was like, huh? Like,
And barely though. She's sort of like, I'm not like super invested in this, but I am staying at Hull House. It's basically like we can be roommates. Like
yeah.
I
He's
don't
like, hey, what's up? And she's like, no. She's
know.
like, we can sit together at dinner, maybe.
So, I mean, part of what's happening in this time period is people like Jane Addams are inventing professions that create the middle class in real time. Like, that's part of what's also happening. Like, there's a huge disparity between rich and poor. And I think it's easy to criticize Jane Addams, right? And like those types. But I think she's a person with money and she sees people in great need. And she also understands that simply like there's many problems and there's certain things she can tackle right away, like you're saying with garbage. Like there's direct things that she can use her money on. Where I think she is different from other reformers is there's the mutual aid aspect of she genuinely thinks everyone's life is better by redistributing wealth.
Hmm.
Like she genuinely believes that people meeting in the middle is better than having a disparity between rich and poor. And that's where some of the other characters are foils, like this dude who's sort of visiting. But I think even he is kind of pushed a little bit and is like reconfiguring himself as a lifelong resident of a place like Whole House versus a rich dude who's hanging out.
Yeah, I agree. There's like a transition in his character. Yeah, I do think that's a really important point about that's kind of like puts her apart from other progressives of the same period, that she really believes in the redistribution of wealth, and she's willing to kind of like put her body and personhood in the middle of what she believes. Like you could think about too, like when I think about Jane Addams, I also think about the invention of social workers who are attempting to do similar kinds of work, like going out into people's homes, trying to solve like real world problems about like disease contagion, like family dysfunction, like you name it. But at the end of the day, they get to go home. And so
Yeah.
they live apart from the people they serve. Whereas Jane lives like within she is a member of the community. And I think that piece about her writing her autobiography as the story of Whole House, of an institution, is central to that. And I also think that you made a really important point about her queerness, that like it's a way of like perhaps dodging having to directly deal with that. But if you think about Jane as like one of many people of her generation, perhaps maybe the most emblematic, who thinks about like making the world anew, like remaking
Mm.
society to solve major problems, like creating a queer space to her is like one of, maybe unconsciously or not, like one piece of her solution.
Because it's not a conventional family scenario. It's just not. Like we talked about this, if you're listening back to back with our Samantha episode, we talked about Guard and Cornelia adopting Samantha and then adopting her friends as chosen family. And that's essentially what Hull House is. It's people who are choosing to cohabitate. And Helen Lefkowitz Horowitz has written a brilliant book about the way in this period in the 19th century and other time periods, like the 1840s communal movement, people reimagined like we could live differently. Like we don't have to live family by family. People can have all these different setups, like boarding houses, like egalitarian communes, such as the Shakers. And Jane Addams kind of inherits some of that and modernizes some pieces of it. But to think, you don't have to live in separate units. And for people who are struggling, right, for people who don't have a safety net, thinking about someone like Nellie, if the book was set 10 years later, 100% it would be a social worker intervening. It would be a different story. Um,
Yeah, it's I don't know. I mean, this book to me, like the part that made me sad was like the when you see the challenges that Jane and Florence have to go up against in Chicago to get some of these like basic reforms done. Like
mhm,
a large plot point that we mentioned is that there's a smallpox epidemic.
mhm.
And initially, it's a plot point because someone who's a friend of Emily's brother is one of the first people infected. And they learn this because they go to get information, trying to like find a way to clear her brother's culpability for the initial murder. Again, this doesn't really matter, but they go there. It doesn't matter to us
Trust
anyway.
us.
Trust us, it doesn't matter. But the point is, they go to ask him some questions and he's sick with smallpox.
Yeah.
And so he's brought to like the hospital or pest house. And then when Emily goes back to Whole House and she tells them what she found, they're like, oh my God, like we hope does not turn into an epidemic that affects like our community in this neighborhood. And sure enough, it does. And she ends up like going out with Jane and actually like washing and preparing a young girl's body who is passed. But what they go up against is like wanting to force vaccination in the neighborhood to protect everybody. But the alderman who could do that won't do it because they're supporting the progressive candidate who's running against him.
Yeah. And it's straight up just machine politics. We're going to be writing a children's book called Florence and the Machine,
We have
all,
to.
all about Florence and the grift system. But part of what Emily is learning is like it's not people acting on rational impulses. This might sound familiar. It's people like choosing to be obsessed with bureaucracy for no reason. It's people choosing to like give in to grift and machine politics. And it's not a good reason. But then you also have people who have their own legitimate concerns about trusting people they don't know with vaccines.
Hmm.
Right? Like people who have legitimate reasons to be anxious because of other interactions they've had with physicians, right? Or like other bad experiences. I think what I kept thinking about in reading this book was that constant conflict between your personal freedom and public health. And I think we tell a lot of really unhelpful stories about people of the past. The dynamics that are playing out right now are not unique. They're not really that new. They're slightly different. There's changes in how they're being represented, but there's a central tension here of people basically saying like you can't tell me how to live even though it is for the greater good of other people's health.
Exactly. And I was wondering if my friend Frankie had actually known some of these cases, because particularly in Massachusetts, this was a huge issue that states pass vaccination laws, compulsory vaccination laws. And it ends up going to the Supreme Court because so many people are fighting this and saying, like, you're violating my individual freedom. Like, you have these like insane visuals of members of the Board of Health and these agents going out in the street and like tackling people to vaccinate, to like force
Mhm.
vaccinate them for the collective health of the community. And so these kinds of tensions erupt into a Supreme Court case. And the decision basically says we treat disease as we would an invasion of a foreign nation. Like,
Yes.
and if that was the case, if a foreign country was invading us, we would be thinking about defense collectively. So in those situations, like it is compulsory. Now, of course, there's all kinds of exceptions to that, as we can see now in our debates about vaccination. It's not totally compulsory. You can get out of it if it's for a religious objection, et cetera, et cetera. But I mean, it to me, that was what really resonated with me about this book was like even conversations about wearing masks now,
Yeah.
like people are turning wearing mask into a debate about personal freedom and personal speech. Like I will just say for myself, that is so nonsensical and a purposeful like repositioning of this entire thought process. Like it is not a violation of your individual liberty to wear a mask. It's not that big of an ask, just do it. But, you can see like these kinds of debates and tensions don't come from nowhere. Like we've been
No.
having these debates forever. And I think what really bothered me about like the grift, like shutting down like the greater good and the public health campaign is that like even when vaccination of smallpox was first developed in 1796, like other physicians came out immediately. And even though they knew that it worked, they came out and were like publishing books saying, well, it was drawing on cowpox. So they were like, well, if you get this vaccination, like you will turn into a cow, like you will grow udders, like you will grow horns. Like if you're prepared for that, fine. I've had patients to whom this has happened. Of course, all false. But it was like, it was an ego thing. It was like, well, they hadn't discovered it first. They
Mhm.
wanted to discredit this rival for patients. So all the petty ways that people put in front of the collective good, I think, especially now, like with the anxiety of COVID and everything else, like that's what really stuck with me.
So, and like your response is exactly the Florence Kelly response, which is someone says to her, they all fear vaccination. And something I love about this book is we're like literally 100 pages in, and she's still Florence Kelly. Not just like Florence, like it's very
Flow.
formal. um, it is indefensible, Florence Kelly proclaimed. She had made no mention of her interview with Detective Whitebread. I just wanted to include that.
Oh my
She
God.
refused to be drawn into speculation. Well, we'll put a stop to that. And she's basically going to workshops where she knows that people have it. And I think one of the challenges always is I try to think and other people try to think, so for whom is this a rational reaction, right? Like not wearing a mask. Like for whom is that a rational reaction? And I think to some degree it comes back to people feeling as though the greater good has never served them, so they've
Hmm.
disinvested from it. And I'm not justifying, I'm not making excuses. I think there's that sociological question of like, well, why do people make this decision? It's such a small percentage of a human population that says, I truly have no feelings for other humans. That's a very small percentage. But there are people for whom this is a rational choice to them. So it's like, it's like that TikTok, like what's going on up there, right? Like what is
Yeah.
happening in that brain? And I think someone like Florence Kelly, she's not able to get herself there to understand what's happening in their brain. And I think people are living through that in a different way where it's like, well, why won't these people, right, just do this thing for the greater good? And I think of the way the pandemic has made so many people feel like numb or hopeless.
Hmm.
To me, it's conscious or not for some people, it's a nihilistic flex of like, well, the economy is terrible. I don't feel like I have much to gain in this country. My freedom is at least one thing that I can have a kind of signal to my community about. So this is a small thing where I can flex power.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. And I think with Florence Kelly too, it makes me think that she was so interested in the politics of the family. And
Mm,
this book makes a big deal of the fact that she was divorced.
yes.
But what's interesting too is like in a lot of cases like that, it's not only like kind of like divesting from a national consciousness of which you think you're not a part, but also a privileging of a different hierarchy of which you maybe feel you have more power. So like if you think about the hierarchy of the family, like some people might say like, well, my dad told me I don't have to wear that. Or
Yeah.
like if you're the dad or the mom, you're like, well, I'm the head of this family and I make decisions. Like the state's not going to make decisions for my children. And if you go back and read like some of the early statements by early anti-vaccination leagues in the early 20th century, like that's a lot of what they're saying is like, well, no one gets to make a decision for my family. Like I'm the head of the household. My kid will get to go to school whether he's vaccinated or not. Like you don't get to say, you don't get to decide, I do. And that kind of privileging of the hierarchy of the family, particularly, is relevant when we think, especially about women's health issues, but also more broadly when we think about disease and vaccination.
That's such a huge part of the way labor law plays out in this book as well. Catherine Kishskar, who's a women's history scholar, wrote like the big book on Florence Kelly. And a lot of it is about her kind of crusading around labor laws, specifically related to women. And there's a tension in this book that plays out nationally over and over again, which is, can like a woman reformer, right? Or can people in the legislature tell a woman how much she should work when at that time under coverture still that's a husband's role or that's a father's role. And there's a tension in these families, and it plays out in a lot of industrial communities. It still plays out in farming communities. Who gets to tell a parent that their child has to go to school or that their child is
Mm,
allowed to work or not allowed to work? And there's a specter in the background of the Samantha book of like, Nellie might have to go work in a factory. Reality is she already knows about that experience, right? Like it's actually
yep.
not an abstract concept for her. But also this thing of we don't tend to talk a lot about what that actually meant in great detail. There are factories in which children are doing work, with like bobbins, right? Like in the 19th century, they're literally taking bobbins that are empty or they're moving around, they're doing like very basic cleanup. And then there's stories that in the slower days of the factories, children are kind of there because they have nowhere else to be and there's not a school, but they spend a good amount of their day running outside. This is not like I am not arguing for a reversal of child labor laws. Don't worry. By the early 20th century, part of what's changed is children no longer have the same place in the factories. So they're doing piecework or homework, and it's way worse. Like they are working like 13, 14 hours a day in a house that's poorly lit, surrounded by family, it's tight. And that's not necessarily better, but because it's a family's domain, in quotes, people like some reformers are like, well, we solved the factory problem.
Well, and it's interesting too, because there's a scene of piecework in Samantha's last book where like the
Yeah,
place where Nellie ends up initially after Uncle Mike, um, RIP, or I guess he's not dead, but
he's
dead to
not dead.
us. She's doing piecework, making like paper flowers or something with like 9 other kids in this woman's one-room apartment.
Yeah.
And Samantha, like, literally, it's so outside of her experience that she's like, why are they all making flowers? Like, what's going, like, she doesn't understand that it's work, like that it's like labor for which someone will receive compensation. Like maybe not them, maybe the woman who's housing all of them, but like it's so outside of her experience, like she doesn't even know what piecework is.
Well, it's a foil to her crafting with Aunt Cornelia. At the opening scene of the book, she and Aunt Cornelia are cutting out paper,
Yep.
right? And gluing stuff together, and it's hearts and it's cute and it's fun. And she wants to mail a Valentine to her friend who's like basically doing indentured servitude, cutting out paper flowers.
Yep. Yeah.
So, there's like this huge mile between those two different things. It's sort of like how I heard this amazing interview with a woman who is a weaver. Her name is Karen Hampton, and she does a lot of weaving around her ancestry. And so she is a Black woman who now lives in Massachusetts, but spent a lot of time in California. And she does a lot of writing and thinking around the fact that most of the people who do like weaving and that kind of work in the world are not white women. And yet
Mm.
the presentation of like workshops and things is like white women at these very fancy looms. And she does really amazing artwork around like her family's American story and what that
Mm.
means to her, and also recentering enslaved women and indigenous women in the story of American weaving. This point being like they're not doing it as a hobby. Like the vast
Right.
majority of people who've done this like had to do it as a living or as an art form. But
Well, and I think that gets to like not only like art forms and like piecemeal work you do in your house, but also kind of like the elision in this book and in this time of like women's work in the factory and women's work in the home as like
mm,
you can say more about this than I can, but the separation of like, well, the work you do in the factory, that's work.
yeah,
But when you're home and you're caring for your kids and you're making all the meals and you're cleaning your house and you're responsible for like basically everything running your home, that you're doing for free. Like that's not labor. And that like the fact that we still have that today, like my mom got her accounting of her social security and she basically was sort of shaming herself by saying like, well, geez, I thought I worked more years than this because my mom stayed home with us and then went back to work when my younger brother was 8 or 9, and so for those years, she has no social security, like reported income. And it's like, okay, that's a huge historical thing that you can go off on because that's like more your skill set. But I had to sit my mom down and be like, "Mom, look, that was work. Like, no one has to tell you that raising 3 children and caring for a home and cooking and cleaning, like, that is real work. The fact that you were not compensated for it does not mean it wasn't labor, but it's just a really sad framing in our world of what counts as labor or not."
Well, to think of Jane Addams as a person who on paper, right, like doesn't raise a family, but is involved in like child rearing and is involved in these tasks on a major scale. And part of what's happening in her lifetime is women are saying, well, like you entrust us to teach, toilet train, do all of these things, right? Of like young people. But then when it comes to extrapolating these skills on a larger scale, you say we can't handle it. And her kind of concept of municipal housekeeping, which Florence Kelly also picks up on, is like, women can solve these quote unquote domestic problems on a larger scale within a community, within a city. I talk about boarding houses a lot with, what I do as a job. And part of something that we kind of explain to people is in a boarding house, if you were a boarder, you didn't have to do domestic duties. And so if you're a man, that's like not really different. But if you're a woman and you're a factory worker, that's a huge difference in your
Mhm.
life. And part of why you see in some communities that are otherwise kind of doing well, women writing in their spare time, women taking on these other activities, is they have their evenings to themselves. They have time to think, even though they've had a very hard day. And I tell people, like, yes, they would work these very long shifts at the factories, but add up how much time you commute, care for your house, care for other people. It's probably also 14 hours a day if you're
Mhm.
lucky,
Yeah.
if not more. And to think of like living in a boarding house, if you had a situation where someone did all of those tasks for you, um, like I'm sure you've all heard the joke, like, I need a wife. Like,
I mean, I have one, but yeah.
no, but the joke being like people
I
who
know.
work full time, like needing a person who does all these tasks for free for them.
Yes. And even just to like think about my parents' generation, like my dad is recently retired, but he had a secretary. He was an attorney. And my mom used to, like, my mom does a lot of like caretaking of my dad. Like a lot of his basic needs are met because my mom will like make doctor's appointments for him or
Mhm.
whatever. But when he was at work, he had a secretary, and at home he had my mom. He has my mom. So like my mom calls herself "It Takes a Village," and his secretary called herself "It Takes a Village too." And they would literally email each other and be like, "I think he forgot like this thing." Like, and but like it was a joke to them, but to me it was like, wow, like look at the ways that like he sort of relies on the labor of these women in his life who are willing to do this on his behalf. Like it's not only like he's like, I need a wife, it's like he has like two.
Yeah. Well, someone said to me recently, like, oh, like, I bet your house is, like really neat and like really organized and all these other things. And I said, I have this job, I have a podcast, I have, other things that I do. And I said, it isn't. Like,
Right.
we used to talk about this in graduate school. There are people who are doing a million talks all the time. They are involved in everything, they are doing everything. And I would look at them and their nicely pressed shirts, and I would say, someone else does everything else for them
Yep.
because everyone makes dirty underwear.
Yeah.
Everyone needs new soap. Everyone needs toothpaste. And it's possible to be a certain kind of rock star, particularly in academic worlds, if you have a support staff.
Yes.
Period. Like, no,
Yeah.
everyone has these essential problems, and some people can just afford to have other people take care of it for them. The dream of the progressive, like capital P boarding house, is you basically internally socialize and you delegate that in a way that isn't hierarchical.
Yes. And I wonder, I guess, in Jane's life, and you can speak to this more than I can, is like the ultimate Jane stan. Like, so like Ellen is not in this book.
No. Who's Ellen? You explain.
Ellen is like, I'm calling her Jane's partner. And I
Yeah.
know that there's been a lot of debate. Like, I guess that's another whole conversation is like in public history within Hull House, I believe, and other like writings about Jane Addams, like there's been a like a reticence to claim that Ellen was Jane's partner.
Yeah.
And I would say that they were partners in some capacity, but they shared their lives together. pulled their finances at multiple times. And I believe like Ellen was the person who bankrolled their vacation to Russia and like various, yeah. And that's when like that happened. Cause you know how in the book they reference like she hung out with Tolstoy, et cetera.
Yes.
Like
Yes.
I think Ellen was the person who actually bankrolled that trip. Cause Ellen also came from didn't Ellen come from like money as
Yes.
well? Yeah.
Yeah. Ellen Gates Starr is not, I mean, you have three names. You're either a serial killer or you have money. Like there's no other, no one is like Allison Beth Horrocks. They're like, oh, no one.
I'll call
Yeah,
you that if it helps you.
true. I mean, you have three names,
Mary Margaret Mahoney. Yes, I
but
do.
you're prominent.
Excuse me. Or I was like ordained for the convent from birth and it just didn't work out yet, but maybe someday, who knows. But yeah, Ellen Gates Starr. I didn't even know that Gates was her like I didn't know her second name, so I guess I'm like
I have to double check
I
now.
don't
And
have
now
enough
I'm
respect for
concerned.
her. Well, I've
Wow.
always like in my mind referred to her as Ellen Starr, but it's interesting because we've talked about this before on this show, like with romantic friendships or like histories of what you would call now like queer relationships. It's very difficult to find like a smoking gun, like you're
Yeah.
like my wife, or like something like in a letter where it's like, oh, this is exactly, they thought about each other in a way that we can totally in a one-to-one comparison, like compared to a modern day like conception of a relationship. I think they had a romantic relationship. I believe they thought of themselves as partnered. And Ellen was very supportive of everything that Jane was trying to do and vice versa. And I've read excerpts from their letters and things, but it's interesting that like they were so deeply connected as people, but both personally and professionally, like supporting one another's work. For Ellen not to be in this book felt very strange to me.
I absolutely agree. And it has nothing to do with the timing because yeah, she's there at the beginning, right? Like they're conceived of as kind of co-founders of it. I'm not sure why she's not here. And I was reading some reviews and some people found Jane a little bit hard to access. And honestly, I hear that. I understand it. Like one criticism was that she never speaks in contractions.
Hmm.
I do think there's something to her actually being like that. And I don't say that as a criticism of her personality or her person. If you follow Jane through World War One, Jane is an absolute pacifist. Like Jane refuses even when other people come on board for World War One. She refuses. And it honestly ruins her reputation. It ruins
Hmm.
her life. It ruins her finances. It ruins so many things about her. And then, she ends up getting a Nobel Peace Prize, but people really lose a lot of respect for her. And I think there's a rigidity there of people of that progressive era generation that you see with Florence Kelly, like her not being able to comprehend people refusing a vaccination because it's wrong, period.
Right.
Like they are not relativists in that way. It's like,
Right.
well, this is correct. So I don't understand why you wouldn't comply. I've been interested in the way that different aspects of the suffrage movement obviously have gotten a lot of press. And I sort of disagree with the articles that put out a thesis that, there were so many women who were lesbians in the suffrage movement. Not because it's technically inaccurate, but because it erases the way that they had to police themselves.
Hmm.
Right. Like it makes it seem as if this was an integral part often of the suffrage movement and not something that women like really actively work to hide. Like a lot of the top people who are getting profiled this year are what we would call or think of as queer women. And yet their relationships with their life partners were hidden for a very long time.
Hmm.
So to say that they had a life experience that they didn't, I think cuts out a huge piece of like the policing that happened within the suffrage movement.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's sort of like the kind of like air quotes like open secret of it all.
Right,
I
right.
think you without taking on the shame, like I don't want to read shame back onto any of these women.
No, no.
Because I think based on like things I've read about several of these women, they didn't feel any discomfort or shame around their relationship with whomever, but they understood that within the broader movement, like so much of what they were contending with was being able to counter arguments that were grounded in like the heteronormative, what we would now call like a hetero family. So for them to kind of get into a debate where people are like, well, what's next? You're going to want your husband to make dinner for you? Like, obviously, if you're a queer woman, you're like, that's like not even on the table for me,
I know.
period. Right. Like,
I know.
oh, okay. Like, oh, you're gonna like feminize your husband. It's like, great, let's do it. Like, you know what I'm
I
saying?
know.
Like, so
I know.
you can't show your cards on that score because you're gonna lose kind of like your skin in the game, your ability,
Yeah.
your ability to like speak as an equal to a critic who would automatically discount you from the conversation if they understood that that conversation had no relevance to your personal experience.
There are so many things that were sort of like prophesized by anti-suffragists. It was like, they won't want to do this, or like they'll all want to go to college. And it's like, yes, it is.
Yes. Well, have you seen the cartoon of the two women kissing?
Yeah.
And it's like,
Yeah.
pretty soon you won't need a fellow anymore. And it's like, yeah, like, I mean, I guess like that's already happening for some of these women. Like,
But I think that's also, and our friend, I'm calling her a friend, Allison Lang has done like great work with this. Part of it too is like these are women who also exist outside of like a male gaze of desire. Like the
mhm.
way that they've chosen to live their life kind of flouts needing that. And I think that's also where there's a certain rage that builds up against them, right? Like I think some of like the rage against a person like Jane Addams is again her rigidity, her moral self-righteousness, and it's like why can't she just, do you know what I mean?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, and also it's like with World War One, it's like she wasn't having to weigh sending a son off to war. So
True.
a lot of women were like, not just to her, but other women who identified as pacifists were like, well, what's this to you? Like, I'm sending my son off to war and I'm still willing to do that because I believe in serving our country or like what this war is about. And so for her, it was like she didn't really have a lot of like personal like stock in terms of like arguments about the family, which in many ways like she had been like intervening in arguments about the family her whole career, and that's what she continued to do. But I think there were moments like as you're suggesting that her own personal family, air quotes, didn't allow her to speak out in ways that people could take seriously because people were just like, well, on paper you're like this single rich lady, like,
Yeah.
what do you know about sending a child off to war or, a daughter to the factory to like make munitions or whatever. Like,
It's like it's such an American problem though of, like myself, my family before
right.
everything else, right? And like very, and I'm not saying that's uniquely American, but I think in that time period that was one of the major social issues that people like Jane Addams were kind of picking up on, like where is the sense of the collective? And then they run headlong into families who for very real needs of survival are sort of like, I love what you're trying to do, we need to eat.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's like a very real friction that happens between them that I think still happens today, like in different careers, in the ways that people interact with communities, like it's not different.
Yeah. I mean, I think I read an interview not long ago with Gia Tolentino, I think writes for the New Yorker, but they were saying like what is needed now, like in this kind of rupture with COVID to kind of like fix society. Basically, she said there's been such an abandonment of a sense of the collective
Mm.
and collective care and concern that people are so, because of neoliberalism, because of this this narrative that pervades everything of like, good news, like you get to be in charge of your own like student loans, or good news, like you get to be in charge of your own medical care, like
Yeah.
everything now, like it's so focused on the individual that we've lost this sense of like collective concern or collective action. Like your employer with each passing year thinks they're responsible for less and less of the benefits to provide for the other parts of your life, and that's considered normal. Like that has been totally normalized over the past 30 years. That was not that way in the 40s and 50s and 60s and so on. So, I mean, there's all these waves of like, a national trend towards like collective concern and then movements away from it. And we're like almost in this extreme moment away from it. And I think COVID has only emphasized that.
But I think what you're pointing to, like that period of very excessive, not excessive, but like very intensive taxation of very wealthy people allowed for an actual flourishing. I'm not saying LBJ is perfect, but looking at like great society
Yes.
programs, like that was because of like a very intensive period of taxation, like a very like I don't know that people on their own, this is not a philosophy podcast. I don't know that people on their own are ever necessarily inclined to think of the collective first. I think
Nope.
that's not how like Homo sapiens survive. But I think that's why the government has to be rigged for the collective and not for corporations as people. Like
Yes, 100%.
I think that's kind of the difference. I guess where like the progressive era like hit me hard in like 2008, 2009 when we were finishing college is it was people who were keenly interested in solving problems in a time where being very cynical was cool. And I think there's something that you're supposed to think of, especially as a woman, as like corny and embarrassing of wanting to be a part of a solution, right? Or it's very easy to be smart and academic and say, well, they didn't do this part right and they didn't do this part right. And of course, like you should not be patronizing, you should not be colonizing communities with your so called help. But it's like they did actually solve some things. They got
Yeah.
the trash out of the street. Like that's not nothing.
Yes. Well, and I think they did a very basic thing that you would hope people of incredible privilege would do, which is like share their platform and share their privilege, like redistribute it. Now, you might say a requirement is also to kind of get out of the way and not
Yeah.
like center yourself in this work, because oftentimes it's not about the community. If the work is to serve a community of which you are not a member, like it is complicated to keep yourself centered. I'm not saying Jane did that, but I'm just saying that's a piece of this kind of trend of worker that's needed then or now. But I think you're right. Like I remember being in college and being sort of embarrassed for being a very earnest person, and for not thinking as heroes like people who are idealistic. But I wasn't ready to throw them all out because of like this trend towards skepticism.
You know, in contrast to the song Caring is Creepy, I'm going to say I care a lot of
Wow, didn't think I was going to hear that from you today.
um,
A
I'll
music
just say
reference. Wow,
I'll just say honestly, if you really do care about Jane Addams, read her autobiography. It's very interesting.
it
If you're in the
is.
Chicago area, like drop in when you can. I'm not on the Whole House payroll. Should I be? I don't
I
know.
was saying, like, you're speaking as if you work there. You were like almost like an Olive Garden pitch, like when you're here, your family. Drop
I
in.
I would be honored. I would be honored. I would love it. Will I write a book about Jane or songs about Jane? I don't know. Someday, perhaps.
Oh my God.
Um
I would love to do a live show at Whole House.
I truly was struggling. Same. I truly was struggling where I was like, I don't know where to begin this episode because I will never end it.
I think, yeah, I think I've known that the whole time that that was going to be an issue. So I will be the one to say, I think, we're not saying goodbye to Jane. We're just saying, Jane, adieu. We'll see you later. We'll pick up with you further down the road and we'll see where each other are at.
Yeah.
And so maybe to redirect your energy for a moment, what will we be taking on for the month of September?
We are going to be reading Dear America, A Journey to the New World, the diary of Remember Patience Whipple on the Mayflower 1620. Why are we doing this? Great question. You didn't ask. So, we are doing this in part because this autumn will be the 400th anniversary of the arrival of the Mayflower in what is now the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And so, part of what we want to do is reread this book, the Dear America book, but also talk a bit about what's happening or not happening with that commemoration. This book was also my first Dear America.
I think it might have been mine too. So this will be,
It
I
was
mean, I
hot.
can't wait. It's going to be a hot spree through, the Mayflower. I can't possibly wait for this. I also want to just add that we will be also with our patrons watching Annie
Yes.
soon. So that's happening as well.
And we're looking ahead to some Halloween plans that may or may not involve witches.
Which, who can
Part
say?
sandwich. I don't know. No, that's the Mayflower book. Just kidding. So be sure to grab your reading materials. And I think it'll be an interesting conversation about commemoration. And I have been really wanting to reread this book because I have such vivid memories of holding that book in my hands and thinking, while I was sitting in my dad's truck, like, wow, I've really been given like this special thing.
Yeah. Oh my God. Baby Allison's very cute.
Yeah, well, I was really excited about it, and the green cover is still as, like, a beautiful emerald as I remember it, and also I feel like you kinda did me a solid by reading Death at Hull House, so
I did you a solid, and I just want to prepare you that for October, I will be expecting an apology of some kind because you've multiple times told me that if we lived in Salem, I likely would have been burned as a witch and you would have turned me in
yeah.
and testified against me. So like I have to walk through my life knowing that, and that's hard.
I know that I would have turned to others and been like, "You don't have questions?" So, it's like I would not be directly involved, but I would
That's even
implicate.
shadier. You wouldn't even put your name on it.
I would put my name on it ultimately, but I would turn you in, no problem. I know that about myself.
Oh my God. How traumatic for me.
The fierceness with which Florence Kelly enters spaces in which she is not welcome and tries to enforce rules took me
That's
back
you.
to being a 5th grade girl, and just I I just felt it really hard.
Like, it's kind of a blessing you were never an RA because, like, everyone
No.
would have been written up every day. And, like,
No.
meanwhile, you would have had, like, Yankee candles under your bed.
That's the thing. As people enjoy pointing out, they're like, "You care very much about the rules except for in these categories in which you've decided they are arbitrary and meaningless." And I'm like, "Yeah, it's Virgo season. Buckle up. Get over it."
Oh
Um,
my God, Virgo season. It's a scary time for me. Somebody say a prayer for me. Thank you.
it's it is a scary time because we're approaching the zenith of our power, and my family is fingers crossed, like expecting a Virgo to enter the world. So like we're safely in that corridor now, and I'm very excited.
I'm excited too. I mean, I
Yeah.
feel like I'm part of it.
He or she will be a Chicago baby, and yes, they will get Hull House gear for their first birthday.
My God, they kind of have to.
Yeah.
Damn. Well, this has been a real trip. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting the show. We really do appreciate you. We love like making this content for you. So, thanks for listening.
Thank you very much for supporting the show. And thank you to the people who tell us that this is a valuable part of you getting through the pandemic, because it makes us feel like what we're doing is really valuable. And so we really do appreciate you saying that.
Yeah, definitely. And like be safe, everyone out there who's like living with or friends with a Virgo. Like I'm thinking about you.
Yeah. This is a very brief addendum, but you have to know it for the sake of posterity. Jane Addams is a Virgo. That's it.
Wow. Thank you for that.